The Heart in a Glass Bottle by Zhou Dedong. The heart was the kind that often appears in love poems, the kind that lasts till the seas run dry and the rocks crumble. The bottle was the sort commonly seen in hospitals made of glass. Zhou Dedong, what an unlucky name, often wondered what it would feel like to have a bullet enter the back of his head. Every time he thought of it, his insides went hollow. He sat in death row prison, wearing handcuffs and leg irons so heavy he could barely move, waiting for the metal slug that would be cremated with him. And right now, that cold slug was still in its cartridge, still in some young policeman's holster. Maybe at this very moment that young officer was on a date with his beautiful girlfriend, and while they kissed, the girl's slender hand might have brushed over it. Her little hand was warm and soft, intensely sexy. At last, that day drew near. As if they were playing a joke on Zhou Dedong. They would not execute him with a gun after all. They had changed it to a drug injection. In order to prepare himself for that terror, he had been shot countless times in his imagination, and each imagined death had been excruciating. But now, with the greatest casualness, they had changed their minds. It was said he was the first prisoner to be put to death by injection. No one knew whether that made him lucky or unlucky. He seemed to prefer the bullet. He knew a little about guns and bullets, had a little preparation, a little imagination, but he knew nothing about dying by injection, and in an instant he had no footing left and fell into a bottomless pit of fear. He felt the death brought by a bullet should be instantaneous, a delicate and deep point. But the death brought by drugs was far more likely to be long and drawn out, like the blood-colored sea of clouds at dusk, a strange and elusive plane. After he was sentenced to death, he had been ashen-hearted like a walking corpse, imagining bullets flying toward him every moment. But when he learned he would die by injection, he suddenly felt weightless, as if he had gone mad and wanted to run. But all around him were walls even a tank could not smash through. He had no relatives. They were all dead. Not a single person came to see him before he was executed. Not even Xiao Qiao. He always felt that, in a way, he should count as having committed a death-worthy crime for Xiao Qiao. The day arrived. The weather on this day seemed no different from usual. Zhou Dedong was taken out of death row prison. The moment had come. He was being sent to the execution chamber. In fact, the execution room was inside the prison compound, only a few hundred meters from his cell. The room was empty and quite clean. There was a special iron frame. When a prisoner lay down on it, it was almost comfortable, except that the limbs and head had to be fixed in place, and then people in white coats would come over and gently give the injection. But the death row van had to turn on its siren and drive out onto the street for a big loop before coming back to carry out the execution. Perhaps so he could take one more look at this bustling human world. Perhaps to stage a show of justice and suppress those with criminal tendencies. Zhou Dedong could not sit up. He lay slumped back in the van. His trousers grew warm for a moment, then suddenly very cold. Inside the death row van sat two doctors, both forensic doctors. They were both men, both over 50, both kindly. Both wearing white coats that were not very clean. Zhou Dedong recognized one of them. Of course he recognized him. He was Xiao Qiao's father. If he had not obstructed things in every possible way, he would already have become Zhou Dedong's other father. Dr. Qiao seemed not to recognize Zhou Dedong at all and chatted casually with the other man in a white coat. They were talking about prices. Dr. Qiao mentioned the vegetable market near his home and said the price of potatoes had doubled in only half a year, which made him furious. Later they talked about movie ticket prices. At last, Dr. Qiao pointed at Zhou Dedong and asked the other man in white, "Have you read this death row prisoner's medical report?" The other man said, "I have. Other than some trouble with his stomach, everything else is fine." Dr. Qiao reached out and gently pressed Zhou Dedong's chest. "I'll take out his heart in a bit." The other man said, "Then I'll take his corneas." The heart and corneas were both things Zhou Dedong had voluntarily offered to donate. At that moment, Zhou Dedong kept blinking at the two doctors' mouths like an animal. He could no longer feel sorrow, no longer complain, no longer be afraid. His eyes were blank. His body seemed to have already turned into a pile of corpses that had nothing to do with him. When Zhou Dedong was in middle school, he often had a strange dream. At night he wandered in a daze along an empty road, and behind him came the clear sound of bells. Dingling, dingling, dingling. When he turned back, a horse-drawn carriage came toward him. On the carriage was a square black cabin, and on the cabin there was a door covered by a black curtain. Strangely, there was no driver. He thought maybe the owner was sitting inside the cabin. Sure enough, when the carriage passed beside him, it stopped. The door lifted open a crack, revealing a face. It was very, very white. The man said, "Get on and go." He shook his head warily. The black curtain fell back down, and the carriage continued onward. The sound of the bells grew farther and farther away, and the world returned to silence. Then, from some distant place, he heard monks chanting sutras, neat and urgent. As he kept walking, he heard footsteps behind him. He turned and saw a pair of brown rain boots. No one was wearing them, yet they walked along the road. He stopped abruptly and stared hard at them. When they passed Zhenjili, they seemed to pause, as if there were an invisible person inside who wanted to say something to him, but in the end said nothing, and quickened his pace, moving on. They grew farther and farther away. How could a pair of rain boots walk on their own? Zhenjili was terrified and decided to catch up and make sense of it. He was wrong on that point. There are many things that can never be made sense of. He broke into a run, drawing a little closer to the running rain boots. They did not seem to be adult boots, nor children's boots, but something between the two, a little smaller than an adult pair and a little larger than a child's. As they walked, they seemed to sense someone following them, so they turned around, their toes facing him, and stopped. Zhenjili's heart beat harder and harder. He picked up a brick from the roadside and gripped it tightly in his hand. "Who are you?" he asked, trembling. The rain boots moved. Slowly, they walked toward him. Terrified beyond measure, he raised the brick and smashed it down hard. He heard a human scream. Then the pair of rain boots staggered once and finally turned toe up, motionless. He was so frightened that he turned and ran. After running for some distance, he looked back. The road was empty with nothing on it, but he did not stop. He kept running. Dingling, dingling, dingling. The bells rang again. He looked back. It was that carriage again. When it passed him, it stopped once more. The black curtain was lifted a crack, and a white face appeared. The man said, "Get on and go." Zhenjili was truly too tired to run any longer, so he climbed aboard. The carriage rocked forward. Inside was pitch dark. Nothing could be seen. "Why don't you open the door?" Zhenjili asked, feeling around as he spoke. In the darkness, the man said, "This carriage has no door." At that time, Zhenjili and Xiao Qiao had gotten together. It counted as an early romance. Thinking back on those years, he felt very sweet. He and Xiao Qiao both studied at the railway school. One day after class, Zhenjili rode an old bicycle home and saw Xiao Qiao walking along the roadside on foot, her foot seeming to be injured. He stopped and asked her, "What's wrong?" Xiao Qiao said, "I twisted my ankle." He said, "Get on, I'll take you." Xiao Qiao came over, gently held his waist, and sat on the bicycle. As he pedaled, Zhenjili said, "Why are you getting heavier and heavier?" She leaned down and looked below. "Your tire is flat." So they both got off and pushed the bike, looking for somewhere to pump it up. Passing a cold drink stall, Zhenjili saw a bad boy named Kahei and several local toughs squatting on the ground eating ice cream. Kahei also attended the railway school. They were not in the same class, but Zhenjili had heard of him. He was pretty ruthless, and nobody dared to mess with him. Zhenjili felt awkward and kept walking, wanting to go around them. Xiao Qiao did not understand the balance of strength between men. She shouted at Kahei, "Why are you so annoying?" Kahei's face darkened at once, and the atmosphere turned tense. Zhenjili's first instinct was to run, but he did not run. He gritted his teeth and said, "Kahei, don't bully girls." Kahei staggered over, looked Zhenjili over for a while, then suddenly flung half an ice cream into his face. Zhenjili froze, dropped the bicycle and went mad, lunging headfirst at Kahei's chest. Later, he regretted it a little. That move was more like a woman's move, more like the move of someone forced to the end of the road. Especially after he and Xiao Qiao started dating, the more he thought about it, the more ashamed he felt. He kept regretting that he had not thrown a punch then, even if getting hit would still have been heroic. At the time, Zhenjili heard Xiao Qiao cry out. Then fists and kicks came down over him. What he remembered most was that it had not rained that day, yet Kahei wore a pair of brown rain boots. 10 minutes later, Zhenjili lay by the quiet roadside, covered in injuries, while Xiao Qiao knelt beside him and cried her eyes out. She helped him home. For the first time when Zhenjili leaned against her body, he felt how thin she was. The first time Zhenjili kissed Xiao Qiao, it did not feel very good at all. At least it was not as good as he had imagined. That night the moon was white, and Xiao Qiao, chilled, leaned against him. He took the chance to hold her, and the two of them trembled as they pressed their lips together. Afterward, Xiao Qiao looked at Zhenjili in silence. Her lips were red and moist. Tears glittered in her eyes, and she asked uneasily, "Will I get pregnant?" Zhenjili felt this was the kind of scene described over and over in novels. Far too unconvincing. He did not go along with her and keep talking in that direction, but instead lifted his eyes toward the far distance. Although he knew Xiao Qiao was a pure-hearted girl, he still felt her words were a little affected, a little contrived. Xiao Qiao changed her words. "You won't fall out of love with me, will you?" He drew his gaze back and looked into her eyes. "I love you, Xiao Qiao, believe me, my heart will always be yours." He took her hand and gently pressed it against his chest, and Xiao Qiao smiled with happiness. After middle school graduation, Xiao Qiao was admitted to a technical secondary school. Zhen Jili did not get into anything and went to work as a salesman for an insurance company. He loved Xiao Qiao deeply, and she loved him deeply as well. All of his salary went to buying Xiao Qiao clothes and cosmetics. They spent too much time together, and he began to feel she was not his girlfriend but his wife. His feelings for her had mixed with family affection. He worried about her all the time, afraid she would be bullied, afraid she would be hit by a car. If he did not see her for a day, or if he did not call her for a day, he would grow restless. By then, Xiao Qiao had already given her virginity to Zhen Jili. The first time was in a wheat field outside town, on a day when the sun was dazzlingly bright. Afterward, Zhen Jili saw her lips red and moist again, tears glittering in her eyes. This time she did not ask, "Will I get pregnant?" Instead, she said in a trembling voice, "I keep feeling that some enormous misfortune is going to strike between us." He held her gently and said, "How could that be?" Xiao Qiao looked into his eyes. "Will you fall out of love with me?" He said, "I love you. Believe me, my heart will always be yours." He took Xiao Qiao's hand again and pressed it to his chest. "If you don't believe me, I'll dig it out for you right now." Xiao Qiao smiled with happiness. If Xiao Qiao was happy, then he was happy. Later, Xiao Qiao brought him home. Xiao Qiao's father was a forensic doctor, and her home had the smell of Lysol everywhere, which made Zhen Jili feel that it was very clean and very safe. Not long after, Xiao Qiao's father came back. His face was white and clean. Zhen Jili suddenly felt an icy chill in his eyes. At that moment, the Lysol smell filling the whole house abruptly turned into a murderous aura that would wipe everything out. Zhen Jili sat amid that murderous aura, feeling extremely uneasy. Xiao Qiao's father was not cold though. He smiled faintly, and instructed the maid to pour tea and peel fruit for him. He did not say much. Still smiling faintly, he went into his room and never came out again. From that day on, Zhen Jili never again went to Xiao Qiao's house. The next day, Xiao Qiao came looking for Zhen Jili, and as soon as she entered, she was crying like a river of tears. It was the first time Zhen Jili had seen Xiao Qiao cry so hard. His own eyes grew red too, and he said, "Xiao Qiao, if it really won't work, forget it. We don't necessarily have to get married, and we don't necessarily have to stay together day and night." When Xiao Qiao heard him, she shook her head hard. "You don't want me anymore." With tears in his eyes, he said, "Xiao Qiao, believe me, no matter what happens, this heart of mine will always be yours." From then on, Xiao Qiao and he began a long struggle with her father. Year after year, in the blink of an eye, they were approaching 30, yet neither of them would marry, forcing Xiao Qiao's father to give in. Xiao Qiao's father felt that all of this was Zhen Jili's fault and hated him even more. He swore that as long as he still had one breath left, he would never let his daughter marry that mediocre man. Xiao Qiao had obviously grown older, and fine lines had appeared on her face. Zhen Jili truly did not want to keep dragging this on. He felt he was committing a crime, so he said to Xiao Qiao, "Give it up, go find someone else." Xiao Qiao sighed and looked at him for a long time. "If that happens, will you hate me?" He shook his head firmly. "Will you hate my father? In fact, the reason we have been fighting for so many years is that we both love you too much." "I don't hate him." Xiao Qiao buried her head in the hollow of his shoulder and said softly, "But I hate him, and I hate you too." During that period, an unexpected figure appeared, Kahei. That boy had actually gotten into a university that year. It was something nobody had expected. After graduation, he started a company. They said he was doing very well. Later, for some reason, his wife divorced him. Xiao Qiao did not come looking for Zhen Jili for a whole week, and his life suddenly became empty. One day, after he finished a late-night snack alone and was walking home, he passed by Xiao Qiao's house and saw a man walk in through her door. It was not raining, yet that man wore a pair of brown rain boots. That night, Zhen Jili called Xiao Qiao and confirmed everything he had suspected. Xiao Qiao said her father seemed to have been bought off by Kahei, and he was extremely satisfied with Kahei. Then Xiao Qiao sighed and said, "Anyway, it's already like this, so I might as well leave it to fate." A strong impulse suddenly rose in Zhen Jili, lunge at Kahei's chest. Very quickly he corrected his own thought. "Punch him," he said in a low voice. "I won't let that scoundrel off." Xiao Qiao stayed silent on the other end of the phone for a long time. Then he seemed to realize something and suddenly asked, "Are you happy? He treats me pretty well." Zhen Jili was choked speechless. His throat felt blocked and he said bitterly, "Ah, that's good." After hanging up, he rushed into the kitchen and gulped down glass after glass of cold water. From then on, Zhen Jili and Xiao Qiao were completely cut off from each other. He grew depressed and very soon lost his job too, with his last month's salary. He bought a huge pile of fresh flowers, arranged them in his room into Xiao Qiao's name, and sat staring at them blankly. Xiao Qiao's name was Qiao Yan. Later, Zhen Jili heard that Kahe really was good to Xiao Qiao. He spent most of his assets buying her a villa-style house. Every day he drove her to and from work, come rain or shine. Zhen Jili, who had fallen into ruin, never found another job. His days grew more and more difficult, and in the end he even struggled to eat. That day, in a light drizzle, Zhen Jili ate a bowl of noodles and drank 2 bottles of beer in a tavern, then swayed down a dark road with no lights. Now and then he lifted his head and saw a person walking ahead of him. The pair of brown rain boots let Zhen Jili know at once who it was. Old hatred and new hatred surged into Zhen Jili's heart like a roaring fire. He could tell Kahe was drunk too. And even more drunk than he was, walking crookedly. Zhen Jili bent down, picked up a brick and chased after him. The bag tucked under Kahe's arm was bulging. Zhen Jili thought, that must be money, enough for me to live on for half my life. He tightened his grip on the weapon. At that moment he could not tell whether he was acting for love or for profit, and with a flick of his wrist he smashed the brick down on Kahe's head. The other man crumpled softly to the ground. Zhen Jili struck him a few more times until brain matter burst out. At that instant, Zhen Jili felt he was doing it for Xiao Qiao, and that this made him glorious. Otherwise, he could have just knocked the man out and taken the bag. There was no need to kill him. Then Zhen Jili picked up the bag and ran. He was both terrified and excited. At that moment he again felt that he was nothing but a shameful robber. After only a few steps, he suddenly felt something was wrong. He looked around. There were no pedestrians anywhere, so he turned back, crouched over that person's face, and examined it carefully. In an instant, he went blank. This person was not Kahe. He had only killed a pair of brown rain boots. In the blink of an eye, the street tour was over. Zhen Jili was taken to the execution chamber. Dr. Qiao asked kindly, "Young man, are you afraid?" He said, "No, I'm not afraid." Dr. Qiao smiled gently. "Then roll up your left sleeve yourself." He tried several times and still could not manage it. In the end, Dr. Qiao helped him roll it up. Then Dr. Qiao swiftly fixed him onto the iron frame, drew the drug into the syringe, and walked closer. As Dr. Qiao lightly stroked and rubbed Zhen Jili's arm with those thin fingers that gave off a Lysol smell, searching for a vein, he said in that doctor's gentle tone, as if speaking to a child, "It's all right. It won't hurt. Really, it won't hurt. Just like an ordinary shot." Zhen Jili kept staring blankly into Dr. Qiao's eyes, and his lips began to tremble. The instant the needle pierced his skin, he suddenly forced out 2 weak words through clenched teeth, "Dad." Then his head seemed to float upward, and his eyes fixed on Dr. Qiao's face. He could no longer see him. The poison that killed him carried him back to that dream from many years ago, only now the image was even clearer. Night, an empty road. The sound of monks chanting came from far away, neat and urgent. Then he saw the pair of brown rain boots again. No one was wearing them, yet they moved across the ground. They were a little smaller than adult rain boots and a little larger than children's rain boots. They stopped, their toes turned toward him, and slowly walked in his direction. Terrified beyond all measure, he raised a brick and smashed it hard toward them. Then he began to run. His legs were shaking badly, and he could not run any longer. At that moment, he heard a crisp ringing of bells on the empty road. Dingling, dingling, dingling. It stopped beside him. The black curtain was lifted a crack, and a clean white face appeared, saying, "Get on and go." He climbed aboard. The carriage moved on. He sank into endless darkness. "Why don't you open the door?" he asked. Dr. Qiao said in the darkness. "This carriage has no door." That day was a weekend. Xiao Qiao came. She bounced into her father's studio and called for him to go home for dinner. She saw a glass bottle filled with culture fluid inside, which sat a heart bright red, and she instantly vomited. Kahe and Xiao Qiao had always been deeply in love. Their ordinary days need not be repeated here. Coincidentally, not long after Zhen Jili was executed, Xiao Qiao suddenly came down with a serious illness. She was diagnosed with viral deforming myocarditis, which caused necrosis of the heart muscle. By the time she was sent to the hospital, even breathing was difficult, and her heart had even stopped beating. The doctors hurriedly put her on an extracorporeal circulation machine to keep her alive for the time being. Kahei was so anxious he looked like ants on a hot pan. He declared that no matter how much it cost, he would save Xiao Chao's life. A famous heart surgeon took charge and performed a heart transplant for her. The operation lasted 6 hours. Her heart was removed and discarded. Another heart was put into her body. Thankfully, there was no rejection reaction. The day she was discharged from the hospital, she and Kahei hugged each other and wept. That night, Kahei was away on business out of town and was not at home. Lying in bed, Xiao Chao saw scenes from her girlhood flash before her mind like a movie. The sky was blue, and she and Zhen Jili sat together on the grass. Zhen Jili silently plucked blades of grass from the ground. His hair was long and stirred by the wind. Xiao Cao said, "You won't fall out of love with me, will you?" Zhen Jili looked up at her, his eyes flowing with thick, sticky love. "I love you, Xiao Cao. Believe me, my heart will always be yours." Then he took Xiao Cao's hand and gently pressed it against his chest. His heart was beating very strongly, thump 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 thump. Xiao Cao believed him. She liked the vigorous beating of a man's heart. In this quiet deep night, as Xiao Cao kept thinking, she suddenly grew a little afraid, as if she saw a cold iron window, with darkness flickering behind it, and Zhen Jili's pale face faintly visible. Her heart began to race. She told herself he had already been dead for half a year. Don't be afraid. But her heart beat even harder, as if excited, as if angry, almost bursting out of her chest. She suddenly realized this was another person's heart, so she became even more terrified, and the more terrified she was, the harder that heart beat. She opened her mouth and struggled to breathe, her eyes flashing with terror. A weak voice seemed to come from inside her body. "Where is your own heart?" The next day, when Kahei came back, he found that Xiao Chao was already dead at home. She died of heart failure. Time is the most terrifying thing. The end.